Hi, everyone. This is Eric Schuler. I'm going to be hosting the Q&A shows with Scott Horton now to get him to finally answer some questions. And I figured what better way for us to start out but by talking about the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal that President Trump announced yesterday, unfortunately. So, Scott, how you doing?
I'm good, Eric. How are you, man?
Good. Yeah, I'm doing well. I mean, been better before this announcement, but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So I figured what we'd kind of do today is just kind of go through his announcement and kind of debunk some of the major grievances he aired in it and see what you think about him, if that works for you.
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
Okay, so there's a lot in here. He's kind of all over the map, true to form. But one of the first things he says, and kind of his key sticking point here, is that he says that it's going to allow the Iranian regime to keep enriching uranium to breakout capabilities and has very weak limits. And so this is something that he repeats many times in the speech, going back to that this is going to let them get to their breakout capability and it doesn't do anything to stop them. So what do you think about that?
Well, it's not true. I mean, here's the thing. The breakout capability is sort of like assault weapon. Assault rifle, well, that has a definition, right? That means a fully automatic rifle. Assault weapon is just a gun that a Democrat wants to ban, right? So a breakout capability doesn't mean they could actually make a nuclear bomb. It just means they have enough nuclear material that if they decided to enrich it further up to weapons grade, and if they, had a magic spell that would make the rest of the world hold still while they did so, then they would have enough to machine it into a core that they would have one nuclear bomb, which you got to figure they would have to test one. They'd need at least two. And anyway, obviously, it's basically meaningless because, a fast breakout capability, the way that they put it, they were so worried back a few years ago, was that the Iranians had a breakout capability of a year. Again, that's not how long it would take for them to make a bomb. That's how long it would take for them to have enough nuclear material, enough weapons fuel to make a bomb. And so the whole thing's overblown anyway. And of course, as part of the deal, the Iranians shipped out 95 or 98 or something % of their enriched uranium in order to take away, to give away that so-called breakout capability. And they shipped that uranium out of the country to France and to Russia to machine it into fuel rods to use in their nuclear reactors, of course, making it impossible to further refine into weapons-grade fuel. So, if the breakout capability was a hoax in 2015, which it was at least half of one, then it's completely a joke right now. And for Trump to assert that, without explaining, certainly fits. Breakout capability. What breakout capability? Of how long? And of course, that's, in the proper use of the term, really, right, begging the question and assuming the conclusion that they mean to make nuclear weapons and that their goal here somehow, obviously everybody knows, right, is to legally get as close to a nuke as they can so that then one day they can all of a sudden break out and make a nuclear bomb. Except there's no reason to really believe that that's their motive. And again, they don't have the power of Bewitched to just stop time and do all this within the time frame of a year or more or whatever without being bombed off the face of the earth beforehand. America did not bomb Russia or China or North Korea before they could get nuclear weapons. But it seems pretty clear that if the Iranians really did try to make nuclear weapons, that the Americans would attack them before they let it get to that point. And they know that. So the whole thing is really kind of a hoax accusation in the first place. It assumes a premise that is, highly unproven. And the reason why is because it's untrue.
Right. Well, and that kind of takes us to, of course, to Trump. It is a proven assertion that they are pursuing nuclear weapons and have been for some time. And so in his speech, he cites the recent speech by Netanyahu that was releasing what he described as new evidence that the Iranians had concealed documents from the IAEA and whatnot. Is there anything, in Netanyahu's presentation that we learned from that, or that would cause us to change whether we think that Iran really was trying to develop nuclear weapons, or whether they still are?
No, not at all.
In the hypothetical?
No. And in fact, even Ali Heinonen, who is the very hawkish former member of the International Atomic Energy Agency and now at Harvard University, said, oh, well, this is all just the alleged studies documents. I've seen all this before. And so there's a few things about that. The first thing is that most of the alleged studies documents are Israeli forgeries in the first place. More than half the story, probably 2/3 of the alleged studies, come from this smoking laptop. They claim that a laptop was smuggled out of Iran by an Iranian nuclear scientist and given to the MEK and the Israelis. But it's complete nonsense. And at one point, they even admitted, well, it's a CIA laptop. They just put a bunch of documents on it. There was no laptop smuggled out of Iran. And then where they get the documents, eventually they admitted they came from the MEK, the Mujahideen cult, communist terrorist cult that killed Americans in the Iranian Revolution and then turned against the Ayatollah, or maybe he turned against them. So then they went and joined up with Saddam Hussein. And then America inherited them after Iraq War II broke out. And the Israelis, of course, used them to funnel fake intelligence about Iran into the stream and into the media over and over again. And Gareth Porter, of course, is the one who's done the great work on this in many articles, but also in his book, Manufactured Crisis, where he shows, for many reasons, why to believe that these documents were forged by the Israelis and were not genuine Iranian documents in the first place. From, the markings and official seals and everything being missing to, what are pretty obviously pretty good but mistaken educated guesses by the forgers about what the Iranians would be up to. So they have some designs which Netanyahu showed in his presentation of the designing of a warhead to fit in a delivery vehicle on the nose cone of the Shahab-2 rocket. And yet the forgers didn't know that the Iranians had secretly abandoned that nose cone for an entirely different, new, and more advanced nose cone, from the dunce cap shape, a true cone, to more of a baby bottle or dolphin nose cone. And therefore, a nuclear warhead, such as being designed there in the drawings, wouldn't fit and wouldn't be proper anyway. It would make no sense for them to develop a warhead in a delivery vehicle for a nose cone that they were no longer using. Another thing was they were accused of doing bench-level experiments in using lasers to enrich uranium, or not enrich it, but refine it to uranium tetrafluoride, otherwise known as green salt because of its texture. And yet they had a facility, I guess, I'm trying to remember exactly, but I guess it wasn't known until later. But they had a facility that they had been building the whole time, that they later have used since then, in order to refine uranium ore up to uranium hexafluoride gas, which is what you need to introduce it into your centrifuges to enrich it. And so it made no sense that they would have this, laser enrichment thing when they already had the regular process. And then it went on like that. But anyway, so Gareth Porter debunked it. But so if you forget Gareth Porter, if you never heard of Gareth Porter, and you just take it on face value, these alleged studies. Oh, no, another part that Gareth Porter, the other third or so of the alleged studies documents are from American intercepts, which they honestly misjudged, I think is the way Gareth put it, that the military intelligence officials saw all these dual use items, quote unquote, things that could be useful in a nuclear weapons program, and sort of through the tea leaves discern that, wow, this is an elaborate cover for a nuclear weapons program, and they're getting all these things. And so it was sort of, you know, a fair judgment for them to make, but it was wrong. And that, in fact, all those different dual-use items that they had jumped to conclusions about were, in fact, spoken for on the ground in Iran. And so these magnets are being used in this machine at this university. And, you know, this steel that they got was being used in industry in this way and the other thing. And all those things were explained away. There was no secret parallel nuclear weapons program at all. And so, but now if you just disregard Gareth, or you never heard of Gareth, and you just take at face value what Netanyahu was saying there as being legitimate Iranian documents, it doesn't describe an Iranian nuclear weapons program. It describes a research program into looking at making nuclear weapons and what it would take to do so. And so even if you take that at face value, boy, I just remembered a few more points I could have debunked about the so-called implosion tests in the weapons chamber and the lies about this Ukrainian scientist, Danilenko, who was an expert in making nanodiamonds, who they accused of helping the Iranians with their implosion systems at a military base called Parchin, which is, you know, completely debunked lie as well. At the worst case scenario, take all of Netanyahu's accusations at face value. What they describe is research into a possible nuclear weapons program that was all halted in the year 2003, even according to the CIA and the Israeli Mossad, their CIA intelligence agencies. And they say, they judge that after America got rid of Saddam Hussein for them, they had no need to even look into a nuclear weapon anymore. They knew that the Americans weren't coming, and they weren't going to make nuclear weapons to give the Americans a casus belli and an excuse to come. And their strategy this whole time has been, hey, our hands are up, our books are wide open, we're part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we have a safeguards agreement with the IAEA, and so don't shoot. You have no excuse to shoot. We're not doing anything. And so that's basically been their policy this whole time.
And so the distinction there between, so as I've understood Porter's position is sort of that they've never been trying to actually develop a nuclear weapons program, whereas CIA and Mossad, they would say they were trying, or they were exploring it at some point, but then they stopped around 2000.
Right, and that's what these documents are. These documents that Netanyahu showed are the basis for the CIA saying, well, at one point they were looking into it, which is still far short of when you say nuclear weapons program, that means an attempt to make a bomb. And just look at how readily they conflate these different concepts.
Sure. Yeah, and Trump's quote in here, which is, kind of his rhetorical flourish for it, is, at the heart of the Iran deal was a giant fiction that a murderous regime desired only a peaceful nuclear energy program. Which you can kind of see his point that, all these countries that don't have a nuclear weapons program, the U.S. seems to be pretty interested in overthrowing them, and that, hasn't overthrown North Korea yet. And why is that? And so you can see that argument, but when you get into the details, it falls apart.
I think it's fair to say, Eric, that they were building up a latent, and even still have a latent nuclear deterrent. Right. So they've proven that they've mastered the fuel cycle. They know how to spin centrifuges and enrich uranium. So they're not making nukes to give us an excuse to attack them before they could even make one. But it seems fair to say that or fair to interpret, I guess, that their policy is to show that if we attack them anyway and give them no choice but to make nuclear weapons, that they will be able to do so. I mean, even then, though, the problem is, if they can enrich uranium and make a simple gun-type nuke, what are they going to do with it? Put it on the back of a flatbed truck and drive it to Tel Aviv or something? They don't have the ability to deliver a massive bomb like that. I guess they could use a civilian airliner to try to fly it somewhere, in disguise or something like that. But otherwise, pretty difficult to do anything with a gun-type nuke like that. And then, I guess technically it's possible to make an implosion bomb out of uranium, but pretty much if you're going to make an implosion bomb, which means be even conceivably able to miniaturize it, and make it deliverable on a rocket, it would need to be made out of plutonium, and you would have to test it and numerous times in order to actually succeed in making it miniaturizable and all that. So still pretty difficult for them to really achieve it. But I guess, their point basically being, don't tread on me and you won't have to worry about this. And that, should have been good enough for the Americans. It's just incredible to me that Trump has stomped this deal into the ground. I mean, and seriously, like, how can any Iran hawk ever pretend to be concerned about their nuclear program when they've, overthrown this thing that saw the Iranians pour concrete into their heavy water reactor and ship all their fuel out of the country and expand inspections to the nth degree and double verify the civilian nature of their program. And the USA is going to cancel that regime in the name of protecting us from its results. I mean, it's just crazy. And who knows what Donald Trump even thinks. I mean, I always thought this was just a campaign thing of his that, he just took way too seriously. It made sense that he hated the policy of continually certifying that Iran wasn't cheating and stuff. And, I could see how he wanted to change that. But for him to go this far is just insane. And, I guess I'll go ahead and say I'm a little bit hopeful that the Iranians are just going to play it cool anyway and say, hey, as long as the Europeans want to stay in the deal and Russia and China are staying in the deal and you guys want to trade with us, then we're going to go ahead and stay within the deal. Because, again, they weren't making nukes in the first place. So this deal, it didn't lock down a nuclear weapons program. It locked down what was already a locked down, safeguarded civilian program. It just safeguarded it more. And so even if the JCPOA is off, the NPT is still there. And I don't really think, if Khamenei dies and is replaced by some right-wing nut as supreme leader, then I don't know. But under this current leadership, even regardless of who the president is, with this current Ayatollah in charge, I really doubt that they're going to leave the NPT and, do anything really drastic here. Their strategy probably is going to be to continue abiding by the rules to more effectively make a jackass out of the United States and say that, the Americans are the ones who are ruining this, not us. And you can't accuse us and get away with it because it's just too clear that we're the ones who are obeying the rules. Jason Ditz made a point to me on my show earlier today that, now America isn't on the committee for, harassing them under the deal. And now America can't be the ones accusing them and demanding further inspections and all these kinds of things. So, in fact, maybe the already fake casus belli has still been removed from the table and not put back on it by Donald Trump because all our allies still stand in the way. While at the same time, America's ability to use the deal to try to beat them over the head is now limited because the Americans have taken themselves out of it. But they can't take Iran out of it. Only the Iranians can do that. And so far, I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but the Europeans want to keep the deal and they want to be able to trade. And did you see with a brand new ambassador to Germany on Twitter said, hey, German companies, you better stop trying to invest in Iran because those days are over. And this kind of thing, really picking a fight with the Germans there. I think they're going to have to back down. I don't know. This is, Obama levied and had the UN levy layer upon layer upon layer of sanctions against Iran at the expense of our allies who want to do business with them. And he said, listen, trust me, I mean it. And eventually it turned out, really did mean it. That this was his strategy to get a good deal out of them, was to put the real clamp down on their economy and make them desperate to deal. But don't worry, I mean to follow through and I'm going to make a deal and then the sanctions will be off and we can go back to business. And he was able to get, the whole UN Security Council and then some to go along with that. But he's not going to be able to get them all to go and put new sanctions on when it's obvious that America is the one who's causing the problems. They're not going to go along again. So seems like this was their one chance.
So I understand. Yeah. And I understand. So far, it sounds like just the U.S. piece of the sanctions are being put back in place. And I guess that's not immediate either. But That's the immediate effect, or that's the effect of what Trump did, but they're not snapping back the sanctions
and they never
that
really.
applied.
Yeah, they're not doing the snapback of the rest of the sanctions. They can't force that, and the Americans never really lifted the sanctions in the first place. And the regime uncertainty of all of Donald Trump's talking smack for a year and a half leading up to this has meant that American companies and a lot of European companies have not been willing to make these, big long-term investments in doing business with Iran, because it was not altogether clear that the Americans were going to stay in the deal and allow them to do it and allow them to make, profits off of their long-term investments. So they've been waiting around. So America hasn't really been living up to our part of the deal all along anyway. So in terms of the actual reimposition of American sanctions, I'm not sure how much difference it's even going to make at this point. I think they're pretty much already all still there. And you know what? I'm not sure if this is exactly in the talk that he gave, but, the demand that, they need to not have missiles or a foreign policy at all and whatever. And this is just crazy. And there's no way that stuff is ever going to be part of the deal, especially when America is arming the Saudis to the teeth directly across the Gulf there. They're not allowed to have missiles at all. They have rockets that launch satellites, but they're not even cover. I read some real expert stuff about this. You can't even spin it as cover for a 3-stage missile program or anything, or a long-range missile program, because it's just an entirely different kind or type of rocket engine and design and everything. And they really are just for putting up satellites. There's no way to even really use it as a bait and switch for long-range weapons. And so... and then, as I know, every bit of Iran's gains in the Middle East in the 21st century have come as, specially wrapped presents from the United States of America. You can accuse them I'll accuse them of taking advantage of America's invasion of Iraq to the absolute nth degree. But they didn't invade Iraq. America did. It got rid of Saddam for them, and all their gains in power and influence in Syria are only as a reaction against the blowback, the backdraft, the direct failure and explosion of Obama's Syria policy and the rise of the Islamic State, which necessitated Assad asking Hezbollah and Iran to come and help him. And so a mission that was supposed to take Iran down a peg actually raised them up a peg or two. So, you could be sad about that, but if you're an American policymaker and a hawk, all of whom have been, for this Iraq policy and this Syria policy, they're the ones who are responsible for this. And they're the ones who are, crying about the results of their own policies being followed. But so, there's this accusation that this is the rise of the Iranian Empire. The Persian Empire is coming back, and Iran, Donald Trump himself, I saw him on TV last week, Eric, going, Iran is bad. Iran is evil. Iran, boy, they're no good. Boy, they support terror. Iran in Iraq, Iran in Syria. Everything bad there is because of Iran. Yemen too, I heard. Yep, Yemen, Iran and Yemen. Iran. And it's like, man, this poor schmuck, actually poor, 7 billion of us, that this guy is, who can't read, who doesn't know the first thing about anything, who doesn't know the difference between Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, for Christ's sake, is just absolute putty in the hands of his advisors. And all he really means to say is, I just came for a meeting where they told me Iran. And since I'm, barely functionally literate at all, I was absolutely unable to resist their spin. And so what can I say? And it's really bad when, Bush Jr. was a bit of the same way, only he was kind of driving his own car. He wanted to be bad on all this stuff. Obama certainly could read and knew the difference between the good and the bad things he was doing. But Donald Trump is just lost in the dark here, man. He knows which constituencies he has to please. But he doesn't know the first thing about what's going on in the world, or maybe even what's going on in his White House.
Right. Well, and just to make sure everyone knows that Scott is not exaggerating when he says that he's conflating Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda right in the speech. This is what he leads with, really a strong start, is that Iran supports terrorist proxies and militias such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda, all 4 of those. And just right there lays it out there, even though they've been at war with Al-Qaeda for most of this period.
Yep.
So
there you go.
It's a very interesting.
They have some
and that's
bogus court case from New York City that says that some Al Qaeda guys supposedly traveled across Iran at one point. So there you go. They did 9/11, and that's good enough. Also,
they kept that
they
airspace
bombed
open. How could they do?
Yeah, they sponsored the Amal militia bombing of the Beirut barracks in 1983. But might as well have been yesterday, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned that he talks about other aspects of Iran's policies that he doesn't like that this deal didn't cover, which it kind of reminded me of his debate appearance when he said, this TPP, it doesn't account for China's currency manipulation. And Rand Paul had that great line where he's like, China's not part of this deal. That's kind of a non sequitur there.
Right, and then he responded, "You're in last place in the polls. You're pathetic."
Well, he did have a good comeback, if not on topic. But I guess so that's one of his big objections is that this deal didn't cover every possible thing that the U.S. might have disagreed with Iran on, and that's a reason. That
I remember when they passed it. This guy David Rothkopf, that was the publisher of Foreign Policy, or the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine for a while, who's actually come around on Palestine quite a bit, to his credit. But I remember the night, the day that they passed the thing, we're all in the middle of celebrating, and immediately this guy and all the hawks are saying, oh, Iran gets money, and they're going to funnel that straight to Hezbollah fighting in Syria. And it's just like, wow, goalposts. I thought that the problem was that they're on the verge of making nuclear weapons and holding all of humanity hostage, and it was the greatest crisis in all of history. Now we've locked their nuclear program down beyond the nth degree, and you want to talk about they're going to buy some rifles for Nasrallah? You got to be kidding me. And you don't even wait like an hour and a half before you're saying that actually small arms to Hezbollah is the problem and not so much that pretend nuclear weapons program they never had. I mean, and you know what? That's the truth, right? It was a fake crisis all along. It's not like they ever really meant it. And so it's that easy to move the goalposts and just change the subject to something else.
Right. Well, and you mentioned the giving billions of dollars, because that's another thing that comes up in here. You'll hear the hawks always say that America just gave them billions of dollars. What's kind of the truth of that?
Well, I actually don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it wasn't American money. It was their money. And, if anybody hates John Kerry as much as me, good, but you got to hand him credit for this, where he worked this deal where, hey, that money that the U.S. stole from you in 1979 after the Iranian Revolution that they were trying to spend on weapons. That money, and it's not the World Court, Eric. I'm sorry, I got to look this up. I keep forgetting what it is, but it's something like, the World Court for Settlements Between States here kind of thing, did a ruling recently that said that the Americans have to return the money now. And so Kerry said, that money that we took from you and that we have to give you back anyway, that's the money we're going to give you as part of this deal. And they accepted that. And then, so for that to be the talking point of the boo-hoo, they got some money, when that's got to be the biggest scam in the whole world. That money I stole from you, that I'm already being made to give it back to you anyway, that's the money that's going to count as your bribe. And they accepted that. And that's the talking point of the corruption, that they got anything out of this deal when they gave so much. And of course, I don't know exactly what he said in this particular thing beyond, what you've talked about here tonight. But every other time that Trump has ever discussed this, he never talks about what Iran gave up at all, even to play it down. He never even says, well, sure, they expanded inspections, but we think they're secret sites. Or, well, Commentary Magazine talking point, we want to be able to march into any military base at any time and inspect anything we want. And since they won't, let us into the Ayatollah's bedroom, that means they must be hiding something or what. Like, he doesn't even say that. He just says, we gave them money. Can you believe that they got some money? What suckers are we that we gave them money when it was their money? And of course, he just signed the first $4 trillion budget, right? This guy. Every bit they've ever taken from you in income tax is just wasted on one overpriced lug nut for some jet fighter that, is good for nothing anyway.
Yeah, the closest thing he gets to conceding that Iran did something in this deal is that there were very weak limits imposed, and that's as far as he'll give them on this.
And which is just an outright lie.
The inspections of the military sites. He also claims here that there's, they can't do inspections anytime. Could you talk kind of about, the dispute resolution process? What if the U.S. says, not Parchin, but some other place, we think there's something going on in this facility we want to investigate? Are they allowed to do that under the agreement as it existed? What would that look like?
So here's the thing. I mean, think about what a red herring it is that, we can't just march inspectors into any military base at any time. Iran doesn't have the right to keep foreign inspectors out of their military. I mean, no other state in the world would accept anything like that. Imagine the UN trying to say that to the United States, Sure. And yet, here's what the Iranians did agree to. If the committee here, whatever they call it, I forget, votes in a majority vote that there's a reasonable suspicion to investigate, or there's, credible information that deserves further investigation. It's an extremely low threshold of evidence. But if there's credible evidence at all that something suspicious is going on at one of their military sites, then it's a simple majority vote on that committee. And you do the math, it's America, the UK, France, and Germany are all, our three best allies in Europe. And then on the other side of the ledger, Russia and China. And so it's not like the UN Security Council where a single vote by them, a no, could veto it or something like that. It's a simple majority vote. So if America can impress the French, the Germans, and the British enough with their evidence, then the Iranians have to let them in to their military base, to wherever they want to go, to their bases.
And so really,
and
no
if they
matter
refuse,
how
then the sanctions snap back. That's where that phrase "snap back" comes from. Is everything automatically returns because it never really went anywhere. It was only temporarily suspended as long as they were in complete compliance. So it wouldn't have to be the sanctions regime wouldn't have to be spun back up again. It would just simply be turned back on like a light switch.
Right, and then that would include UN sanctions in that case, right? Not just the U.S. ones.
That's right. And ones that then Russia and China would be bound by. And that was the deal that they agreed to as well. And you know what? Vladimir Putin told the Ayatollah, hey, I really think it'd be a good idea if you sign this deal. And that wasn't nothing. That was huge. I know you're supposed to hate and fear and demonize Putin all the time. I guess you could try to spin this that, it's such a horrible deal and that was why Putin supported it or whatever. But that's just crazy. Russia and Iran are not old friends. They're old enemies. And, they're getting along now because they need each other, to try to counter the U.S. But it's not like the Russians want to see the Ayatollahs sitting on a pile of H-bombs,
Right.
So
now, mainstream media sources, they tell us that while it's true that the U.S. can push for inspections on the military sites, the Iranians will have weeks that they could stonewall. And so that's why this is another reason why the deal is bad. Because even if they concede that point, so what? Yeah, I mean, what's the truth of that?
That ought to just show that they're at the bottom of the barrel, scraping for excuses and grasping at straws here. They have credible evidence something's going on at a military site, and then they challenge the Iranians about it with all their allies on board. And then the Iranians try to cover it all up. In the meantime, they would be even more busted than ever before. I mean, give me a break. You can't do that. America's got the eye in the sky, and we got, for that matter, when it comes down to it, we got the Joint Special Operations Command, who, have been off and on inside Iran for years investigating their nuclear program. They and the CIA, they know exactly what's going on. And again, all this question begging, and maybe I'm the one begging the question, but we just already know that this is all a big fake thing anyway. They'd have never agreed to this if they had any plans to make any nuclear bombs, just to make it easier for them to get caught breaking the deal. If they really wanted to go for a nuke, they could have done it back in 2000, say 5 or 6, in the worst year worst years of Iraq War II, when it would have been much more difficult for the U.S. to intervene and do anything about it. But they didn't do that. You know, they continually tried to deal. Remember, Obama asked in 2010, asked the Brazilians and the Turks to intervene and work out a deal, and they did. And it was a huge first step at the time. It wasn't the JCPOA, but it was a huge first step that they would ship out all of their 20% enriched uranium to the French or to the Russians, and then get the manufactured fuel rods back, and all of this. And when the story came out, the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, said, oh, that's ridiculous, and how, you know, they're out of line. They didn't have the right to do that deal, and we don't accept that. We're not interested in this and that. And then only after that did it come out that it was Barack Obama who had personally asked Erdogan and what's his name to do the thing. And then after Hillary intervened and shouted him down, he left them high and dry and shut his mouth and let them kill the deal back before. And, you know, in the 2000s, in the Bush years, they also were willing to negotiate with the E3. They had the E3 negotiating basically on behalf of the U.S. too. But the U.S. just wouldn't cooperate with it. And they were willing to, they even adopted the additional protocol to the Safeguards Agreement for a time. As they put it, as long as they were in good faith negotiations with the Europeans. And then when it was clear that the negotiations were not in good faith anymore, and that the Americans would not allow the Europeans to resolve it, at that point, they closed down that section of the negotiations. But none of this reveals that, ooh, those dastardly Persian imperialists with their sneakiness and their, you know, great negotiating skills or whatever. I mean, all of this, if you follow it, it's pretty clear who's the aggressor here. And you know, I guess I'll go ahead and say, because people are going to boo-hoo, cry their eyes out about it, but it's just as true about Joseph Stalin as it is about Kim Jong-un or the Ayatollah Khamenei, and that is that, yes, of course they're psychopathic killers. I mean, give me a break. What do you think they're not? Who do you think runs your government? Who do you think runs all governments? But that doesn't make them irrational. It doesn't mean that they can't be dealt with on an international basis and be expected to act in their own best interests as leaders of their state, as taught by the libertarian public choice theory. I mean, you know, they love to try to pretend that just because somebody's cruel, that means that they're irrational. And we certainly see, you know, a lot of irrational cruelty out of Washington, D.C. But and you know what? I guess you could argue it really does depend on how much power you got. Because, you know, the Americans can, you know, make and break deals all over the place, because what are you going to do about it is their attitude. They're just bullies, you know, but the Iranians are in no position to bully anybody. You know, their attitude has been, look, you got me cornered. What am I going to do? Which is true, right. You know?
Well, and what do you think? I mean, like you said, these are government leaders, so they are psychopaths. But, I mean, what do you say? So their interest here is getting sanctions lifted, presumably to kind of rebuild their economy. But what is really their interest in that? Because I'm sure the leadership is probably not suffering too much under any sanctions regime, because that's not how sanctions
they're benefiting, right?
Work.
Yeah, the far right, the government far right, the special operations guys in Iran. I don't mean our guys in their country. I mean their Quds Force and Revolutionary Guard. They corner the black markets on all the banned trade, you know. So it is good for them. But the president, Rouhani, won the election on he's going to make a nuclear deal with the Americans, because what the hell? We're not making nukes anyway. We might as well make a new deal with the Americans and get some of these sanctions lifted and bring the economy back some. And that was how he got elected. And, you know, after all, part of being a dictator, if you dismiss the Democratic part or the Republican part of the Iranian regime there and just focus on the Ayatollah, you know, it's good to be king, except during bad times when the responsibility is all on you. And so, you know, a popular ruler or an unpopular ruler can last, but ultimately a regime is based on degrees of consent. And, you know, after all, the American Treasury Department is about the heaviest 800-pound gorilla anybody's ever had to deal with. I mean, these are guys who can hint that they oppose some trade somewhere and send boards of directors scrambling. So they have a vast say in Iran's participation in the international markets. And so, I think, again, this whole frame that they're some avowed enemy of the U.S. just because they have declared and maintained independence from us. The idea is that there's some aggressor state, as the crown prince in Saudi Arabia recently put it to Jeffrey Goldberg, who apparently bought it and would have us buy it, that the Ayatollah is worse than Hitler. And he's worse than Hitler because Hitler only wanted to conquer Europe. The Ayatollah wants to conquer the whole world, right? Now, Hitler might have got 50 million people killed or something like that, and might have actually, made progress at conquering some territory. And things like this. The Ayatollah, regardless of the accusations, has betrayed no such intent, certainly not by any successful measure, unless you count sending Ahmed Chalabi to tell Richard Pearl that the new Iraqi Shiite state would be a best friend to Israel, and that he and Paul Wolfowitz should tell George W. Bush and Ariel Sharon that. But, yeah.
Yeah.
That would again take the Americans out of a legitimate position to criticize, I think.
Right. And it is interesting how America's enemies, at least as America sees them, usually their gains, to the extent they have them, is always America's own blunders, whether it's, and of course I don't mean to conflate the two. They have very different motives, but like Al-Qaeda uses that in September 11th to draw the U.S. in, and then Iran uses Chalabi to convince to help the Americans invade Iraq.
And people always get upset when you say that, as though you're saying, well, it was just an accident and they mean well or something. But no, I mean, you can have a premeditated murder plot that still goes all wrong. And that's what happened here.
Yeah, according to your own evil objectives. That is bad.
Yeah, exactly. Like yeah. I mean, you could have a bank robbery where things don't go well. You don't get any money. A bunch of people get shot. You get felonies. Your partner dies. And right? Same thing here.
Yeah. Didn't make your motive any good.
Right.
So one last thing that, kind of just to go down the list of his BS objections to the nuclear deal, the last thing he kind of mentions is there's sunset provisions, and this is just, even though he disagrees with everything it did, somehow it's still a problem that they sunset, even though it was doing nothing in the first place. Now, it's kind of a weird paradox, but so what is the deal with the sunset provisions? Can you explain?
You know what? I guess I can't claim to know every single different thing that has a time limit on it in the deal off the top of my head. But I think, primarily it means that the Fordo facility that they turned into a research-only facility, that was the terms of that was for 15 years, but then they could go back to enriching for their electricity program after that. Absolutely, their ban, or the ban on them ever making nuclear weapons, is not sunsetted. Again, they were already members of the NPT anyway, but under this, they swore again for life that they would stay in the NPT. They can't even get out of the NPT now, according to this deal. And they have these expanded inspections, the additional protocol, and the subsidiary arrangements to the safeguards agreement with the IAEA that have been expanded, the expanded inspections regime. All that is permanent. None of that is sunsetted. And so I think the sunset may be on the total amount of uranium stockpile that they can have, although we're still just talking about 3.6% industrial grade, never weapons grade uranium, and the Fordo facility in that. But even if you want to take the worst case interpretation of that, well, use the 15 years to heal the relationship between America and Iran so that in 15 years, it's no thing at all to negotiate an extension on that sunset. We really like it when you guys don't use Fordo. How about you sign, we go ahead, do another 15 years here, pal, now that we've been getting along so well. It's a much better way to approach it. And in this context, it's clearly just a fake excuse to nullify the deal in that John Bolton style. It's not a reason at all.
Right.
I mean, what does it do? Does it extend the sunset? I mean, if anything, it cancels, if they get what they want, it cancels the whole deal. And the sunset's tomorrow instead of in 15 years. So how's that progress?
Right.
If
Yeah,
they
it's
go
very
and
hard to see
reopen the
from
Fordo
US
facility
perspective how they
this
would.
year.
Right. And so how could it possibly be the case that if you even concede that this had expanded limits, if you're withdrawing from it, it can't possibly be the case that now a nuclear weapon is less likely than it was. If
Right.
you're accepting that premise, it's kind of
Exactly. And you know
self-defeating.
what? So, okay, what if you're a Republican hawk and you just think that whatever Obama does this week on a legitimate level, take at face value their case, that, you know, Obama's deal isn't strong enough. Boy, I wish it had longer periods before the sunset or no sunsets, or you know, I wish that they had a little bit of something about a limit on missile ranges or something. So still, if you really think that, but you're not just being cynical and trying to ruin everything, but you really think that, well, the obvious solution is to reopen negotiations and try to add and negotiate new things. It's too late for this deal. This deal was signed in 2015. But everyone says they're not in violation of it. The IAEA certainly has said 11 times they're not in violation of it. Everybody agrees about that. And so, you know what? Let's negotiate missiles, friend. Why don't you take a ride on my yacht and we'll all go and be corrupt together and work this out and sell you some weapons and everything will be copacetic or kosher, whichever. Yeah. So, yeah. That's the obvious thing to do if you mean well, right? Just like you don't have to be Harry Brown. You just have to not be George W. Bush. And in that case, then the response to September 11th would be to, you know, get the bad guys one way or another, but limit it in every other way to prove that they were wrong and that we're exactly the ones who should be sided with, not against. Right? To prove that, not by threatening everyone, but by showing that we really are that cool. And so, you know, obviously, that's what anyone who wasn't George Bush would have done, probably. It's the same kind of thing here with Donald Trump. If he wasn't cynically ruining this deal on behalf of Israel and Saudi Arabia and the foundation for defense of democracies, and we're scum on this planet, you know, he wouldn't have to be desperately using these excuses. He has no real case against this deal at all. So he has to come up with a bunch of things like, God, geez, I wish there were more things in it. Well, so the solution to that is cancel the things that are in it, which, as I've, you know, discussed here, as we've discussed here, are substantial. It's not like it's nothing. It's not like Obama gave them the store in exchange for nothing. He gave them their own money back in exchange for a lot.
Right. Well, and I guess the last thing maybe to pivot to on this is it's all happening in the context. We have the North Korea summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un coming up here pretty soon. What do you think the implications are? I mean, America's just reneged on a deal. What do you think this means for those negotiations?
I'll tell you, I mean, they already reneged on a deal with North Korea before, back in 2002. And then since then, they betrayed Gaddafi. You know, they had the deal for Assad's chemical weapons, and then they've attacked him since then, too. Now they're betraying the Iran deal. And so if you were Kim Jong-un, what would you do? You watching footage of Muammar Gaddafi being lynched on the side of the road after making friends with Bush and Blair and McCain, and then being stabbed literally in the backside? Yeah, I mean, you know, the Trump people have said, well, this is supposed to show the North Koreans that, boy, when Donald Trump plays hardball, he plays hardball, and you better give him a good deal that he likes because he won't settle for anything less than a really good deal. But it seems pretty obvious, I think, as you're saying there, that, you know, the clear lesson would be you can't make a deal with this guy. You can't make a deal with the USA. And this guy's no exception to that. If anything, you know, he's the poster boy for it.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like they could probably be confident because even the cases you're citing, basically the deal lasts until the presidency changes, it sounds like. So they'd probably have a good,
right,
you know, at least 2 years if they made a deal with Trump, and then all bets are off because it might switch up.
And Trump's demands are at a very high level. I mean, he wants denuclearization. I think that the North Korean government is, you know, really willing to do this. And, you know, I'm really worried that the CIA and the military are going to come up with a way to ruin this thing. Because, you know, I don't think they really want a war on the Korean Peninsula, but they don't want peace. They want the status quo there. They want brinksmanship. They want their crazy enemy up there to sell weapons to stop and to use as a cudgel against South Korea and Japan, and they just don't want things to change. North Korea, as Fareed Zakaria said about Saddam Hussein's Iraq in the 1990s, they're the linchpin of our foreign policy in the Pacific instead of the Middle East. And if they did not exist, we would have to invent them. You know, that's kind of, they fit that perfect role. And so, you know, the South Korean president is the one who's making this all happen, and with Trump's blessing so far. But yeah, you know, if the Americans had a deliberate plan to convince countries that they better get their hands on some weapons of mass destruction to keep the Americans out, because you see what happens to people who don't have them, this would be how to do it. You know, it's like they're trying to accomplish that, in effect anyways, you know. But so I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, think of this. Having the North and the South Korean leadership are really ready to do this. And then you have Donald Trump pulling this Iran deal crap right in the middle of it. When it's going to take, it would take for the Americans to really be behind this thing and to really give Moon as much leeway as possible to negotiate here, and to really be willing to concede a lot to the North Koreans in exchange for a lot. And, you know, it's one of those things where it's this huge opportunity, but it's going to be difficult. And then this just makes it so much more difficult, I think. It's really sad. You know,
really now
we're going to all really regret it if this has ruined it, you know?
Yeah. Because now basically our best hope for the North Korean negotiations are kind of like with Iran, where they're still be able to keep their deal with the European powers. And so the status quo isn't really changed yet in terms of their program and the prospects for peace, probably, at least in the immediate term. Hopefully North Korea can, you know, be primarily negotiating with the South Koreans and get a deal like that. But do you think there are good chances of that, or not so much, probably?
I mean, I don't know. The South Korean leadership certainly wants to get it done. And, you know, I think they may be prepared to do almost anything to see it through. And, you know, I'm putting all my bets on them just because I got no choice. That's all we got, you know, is their intention here. I think it's pretty clear that the North Koreans are really down to, you know, possibly even dismantle, if not all, a good many of their nuclear weapons, and possibly even truly denuclearize.
Right.
But
okay. Well, on that'll be a good note for us to end on, since it's a little more uplifting, at least.
Yeah.
So that'll conclude. We'll keep on having people submit questions to you on Twitter with the hashtag, or I guess to us with the hashtag SHSQA.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, we'll do this again soon.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Eric. Everybody, that's Eric Schuler, a great writer, regular contributor at the Libertarian Institute. So, yeah, thanks, good deal, man. Thanks.